NC Fast. It is the system that processes food stamp cases, and it is quite troubled. It's certainly been the headline darling lately anyway. The federal government threatened to yank funding because of a case backlog, and just yesterday, the Department of Health and Human Services announced the program director's resignation. What is causing all of these issues, and why is everybody jumping ship? Andrew Ruiz investigates. He's live in the studio tonight with what he found. Andrew.
Jeff, at one point, the backlog affected 39,000 households in our state. One of the worst offenders was here in the East. Pitt County had more than 1,000 untimely pending applications. This was such a big problem that the USDA stepped in and required DHHS to clear the backlog. So now we're investigating to see what went wrong.
It's just unfair to tell the public that we're caught up when they know we're not.
This Pitt County Department of Social Services employee, disguised to protect their identity, agreed to speak exclusively tonight on your side about the backlog plaguing so many departments. They say before NC Fast was implemented, Pitt DSS had a backlog on applications and recertifications.
Even before NC Fast, we were behind. But the old system was different. It was worker friendly. The NC Fast system is not.
Our source tells us NC Fast made matters worse. Among the reasons, the lack of training, increased workloads, and an ineffective management team.
Last minute is the measure of the day there.
In November, Pitt County commissioners called DSS leadership into question. Commissioner Glenn Webb heard employees were kept under close watch. His sources say management limited the number of bathroom breaks employees could take and required them to meet a quota. Our source addressed those claims.
The minimum amount was 8. If an employee is unable to meet the quota, then they said that that employee will be terminated. You know, you were watched as to how often you got up and left your office.
County leaders deny firing anyone over applications, but through a public records request, we found out 5 employees resigned and DSS fired someone in the past 6 months. County HR says they are unable to release the reasons for the changes.
NC Fast is a new system, and it's different, and some people are just not capable of being able to work in that system.
Our source says DSS blamed employees for the backlog, but an investigation into Accenture, the company that created the software, reveals in New York, a $37.5 million contract for work that took 8 years to see results and ended with cost exceeding 300% of the original cost. There was no formal action. In Texas, an $899 million contract behind schedule and $100 million over budget. That contract was terminated. And in Colorado, a $39.6 million contract with work behind schedule, and the state said the company breached the contract. Accenture says bringing this to light is unbalanced and unfair. The company says these projects represent around 3% or less of its work for governments. The company requested we speak to industry experts about its track record. So we did. The response? Accenture is one of the best management consulting firms in the world and one that's never afraid to take on the most complex projects. But we'll let you decide. Lawmakers asked DHHS Secretary Aldana Vosch to provide them with an estimate as to how much money the state spent to meet the USDA deadline. Her response?
The cost is second in line with making sure that our citizens have their needs met.
Officials haven't released a final figure yet, but the counties will cover a majority of the cost. North Carolina was at risk of losing $80 million in food stamps funding if DHHS missed the USDA deadline, something Vosch said was not an option. In a recent visit to Greenville, I asked Governor Pat McCrory how he felt about the deadline.
Frankly, I don't like to get threats from the federal government of them withdrawing food stamp funding, which I think is ridiculous.
I asked DHHS if we could still have a significant backlog if the USDA didn't threaten to take away funding, but they didn't answer my question. Pitt County leaders say they didn't spend additional money to meet the deadline. However, they did hire an outside company to help process the applications prior to the threat, Jeff.
What do you mean they didn't spend any money? I mean, they're talking overtime, right? A lot of employees overtime, that's money.
Yeah, and they say that at this time, they're not going to be able to give that comp time. Those employees are getting comp time,
Okay.
but in the near future, they're not going to be getting those comp time hours. So far, they haven't spent anything.
They will
say.
eventually get them, though. So that money will be spent at some point, just not in the near future?
Well, there's the potential. The PIO told me that if someone decided to leave, they might have to pay those out, or they will have to pay those out.
Also find it very interesting that Aldana Vosh did not deal with that cost question. You notice? She just pushed
Yeah,
it off
no,
at second in line. And
She said that it was at least below $80 million, which would have been the funding that we would have gotten taken away from the USDA.
fascinating. Well, you're going to have to stay on this one.
I will definitely stay on
Absolutely.
it, and of course, update the viewers if there's anything that comes about it.
Andrew Ruiz, live in the studio tonight. Thank you, Andrew.